Okay, now that we have understood the basic Gill-Shapley algorithm, we can think about actually generalizing some of the conditions under which we have demonstrated this algorithm, right? So for example, one assumption that we made is that the number of women equal the number of men, right? So remember, we started out with there are n men and n women, and we want to kind of pair them up, right? So what happens if the number of men does not equal the number of women? Well, it turns out that in this case also you can kind of apply the Gill-Shapley algorithm and get a stable matching system, right? So let's see how that works. Imagine that there are three men. We are going to call them Mr. A, B, C. So again, the ones in small alphabet, small letters, they denote the men, right? A, B, C. And there are five women, and we are going to call them Miss A, Miss B, Miss C, Miss D, Miss E, right? So the ones in capital letters, these are the women, right? And we have the preference rankings, right? So these are on the left, you have the women's preference rankings over the three men, right? And on the right, you have the three men's preference rankings over the five women, right? So again, we know how to interpret this. So for example, Ms. B ranks Mr. C over Mr. A over Mr. B, right? And Mr. B ranks Ms. B first, and then Ms. C, then Ms. E, then Ms. A, and then Ms. D, right? So this is the case. You can clearly see that the number of women exceeds the number of men, right? What happens in this case if we run the Gill-Shapley algorithm? So let's check that. So remember, the first stage, each of the men are going to propose to their most preferred woman, right? So Mr. A is going to propose to Miss B, Mr. B is going to also propose to Miss B, and Mr. C is going to propose to Miss C, right? So you can see that in the first stage, Miss B has received two proposals from A and B, right? And Miss C has received a proposal from Mr. C, right? After this, what's going to happen? So Miss B has to actually decide among these two proposals, right? Remember, she cannot keep more than one proposal in her waiting list, right? So if we go back to Miss B's preference, so she has received proposals from A and B, and she ranks A's proposal over B's proposal, right? So that means that she's going to keep A's proposal in the waiting list and is going to reject B's proposal, right? So the B's proposal is rejected. Now, that means that Mr. B has to, in the second round, go out and propose to the next best in his ranking list, right? So which is Miss C, right? So now basically C has got two proposals, right? One from Mr. C and the other from Mr. B. And then she has to decide which one to reject and which one to put on the waiting list. So if we now go and check that, what's going to happen? So we have got C who has received two proposals, right? And this is a ranking. She prefers A over B over C. So between B and C, she's going to reject Mr. C's proposal, right? And therefore, C's proposal is going to kind of like actually now has to propose to the next person on our list, which is Mr. E, right? So then therefore we have that this is the basically the outcome that we are going to have. So if we run the Gill-Shapley algorithm, the outcome that we end up getting is that Miss B is matched with Mr. A, Miss C is matched with Mr. B, and Miss E is matched with Mr. C, right? So this is the final matching that you get. And in fact, you can show that this is stable, right? In the sense that there cannot be a case where any of the man is going to kind of like go out and kind of like propose to any other woman and get them to kind of like, block this pairing. Similarly, none of the women, even those who are kind of like unmatched, as Miss A and Miss D are here, can go to any of the men and then agree to get them to convince to kind of like block this kind of like pairing that is there, right? So in that way, the Gill-Shapley algorithm still works in this case where the number of men and the number of women are not equal, but you still end up getting a stable matching. Okay, another thing that we had is that restriction, if you like, is that we had this requirement that men need to rank all the women and the women need to rank all the men, right? But what happens if kind of like some of the women decide that they would rather be kind of like unpaired rather than be paired with a certain man, or alternatively, any of the men decide that they would rather be kind of like remain single rather than being paired with a particular woman, right? So it turns out that again here also the Gill-Shapley algorithm will continue to work as expected, right? So let's look at a particular example. So now we have got three women, Miss A, Miss B, Miss C, and we have got four men, Mr. A, Mr. B, Mr. C, Mr. D, right? And you can see that this is the preference ranking. So we have some new elements, which is this 0, right? What's the meaning of this 0? So what this means is that from Miss A's perspective, she is going to rank Mr. A as the best, Mr. B as the second best, Mr. D as the third best, and she would rather prefer to be single than being matched with Mr. C. Okay, so that's how you should interpret the 0. 0 does not mean that it is better than the 1. 0 means that from Miss A's perspective, she would rather be single than be paired with Mr. C, right? Similarly, from Miss C's perspective, you have got these 3 zeros, which means that she would either prefer to be paired, that is the best option for her, to be paired with Mr. D. If that is not possible, she would prefer to be single rather than being paired with Mr. A, B, or C, right? So that is how you kind of like get this. Okay. So similarly, we have again from the men's perspective, for example, Mr. B's perspective, we can see that the best option is to be paired with Miss B. The second best option is to be paired with Miss C. The third best is to kind of like remain single rather than being paired with Mr. A, right? And similarly, that is true from Mr. D's perspective as well. So Mr. D's best option is to be paired with Miss A. Okay. The second best option is to be paired with Miss C. If those two are not possible, then she would prefer to be single. He would prefer to be single than being matched with Miss B. Okay, so let's run the Gale-Shapley algorithm. So again, the first stage is that kind of like each of the men kind of like are going to propose to their most preferred alternative, right? So that means that Mr. A is going to propose to Miss B, Mr. B is also going to propose to Miss B, and Mr. C and D, each of them is going to propose to Miss A, right? So you end up a situation where Miss A has received 2 proposals, CD, and Miss B has received 2 proposals, AB. So let's look at among CD, which one does Miss A prefer? So if we go to Miss A's thing, she prefers D, right? So she rejects C. Remember, she would rather be single than be matched with Mr. C. So C is rejected. And from Miss B's perspective, between A and B, she prefers A. So therefore, B's proposal is rejected, right? So we have got 2 people, B and C, who have to make proposals in the next round, right? So B makes a proposal to Miss C, and C makes a proposal to Miss B, right? So now basically Miss B has these 2 proposals, right, to consider, A and C, and Miss C has kind of like a proposal from Miss B to consider, right? Now, in the previous version, if you had only one proposal, you would basically have to kind of like stick to that, right? But now, basically, you have an option of kind of like rejecting even that, right? Why? Because let's look at Miss C's preference, right? So remember, Miss C had this preference that either she would be matched with D or would prefer to remain single, right? So here, there is a proposal from only Mr. B, but we know from Miss C's preference that she would prefer to be single than be matched with Mr. B, right? So she is going to reject B's proposal, right? So this is going to be rejected. And Miss B, when she's considering A and C, right, she ranks A over C, so she's going to reject Mr. C's proposal, right? So both the proposal from Mr. C and Mr. B are rejected, right? And now basically we have got Mr. B and C who have to make proposals, right? But Mr. B has kind of like, eliminated his possibilities, right? So he had already proposed to the first 2 ones. He does not want to propose to Miss A because he would rather be single than kind of like propose to that, right? So at this point, Mr. B does not have any more proposals to make, right? So that his situation is kind of like finished here. Whereas the third person, C, right? He makes a proposal to Miss C, right? And that is also going to be rejected, right? Why is that going to be rejected? Because from Miss V's perspective, again, she would prefer to be single, right? Rather than kind of like be paired with Mr. C. So she rejects it. And then Mr. C has no more proposals to make, right? So what you end up with is basically matching where you have got Miss A is paired with Mr. D, and Miss B is paired with Mr. A, right? So this is what happens at the end of the Gale-Shapley algorithm. Again, here you can go back and verify that in this case as well, you have basically got that this is actually a stable matching in the sense that there is no pair who will want to deviate from this matching that is specified, right? So it's stable in that sense. Okay, let's look at the third case. So remember, we had this restriction that, no man or woman can say that I'm indifferent between these two other members of the opposite gender, right? The preference ranking that was there was strict in the sense that given a choice between two women, let us say, then the man had to say that this woman one was strictly better than woman two in terms of his preference, right? Now, suppose you want to relax that. Suppose you want to say that, I consider both of the women equally good as my partner, or from a woman's perspective, you want to say that I consider both of the men as equally good from my perspective, right? So we can still actually allow for that, right? Let's see how that works in this case. So recall that the definition of stable matching is the following, that a matching system is called stable if under it there cannot be found a man and a woman who are not paired off with each other but prefer each other to the actual mates, right? This is the definition that we had seen before. So what's the implication of that here? It means that we are going to assume that a man will not leave his paired partner for another woman when he's indifferent between the two, right? If he wants to kind of block the matchmaker's proposal with another woman, then it must be the case that he strictly prefers the other woman compared to the woman the matchmaker has paired him with, right? So that is the way in which to think about it, right? Similarly, a woman is not going to leave her paired partner for another man, right? So she's not going to block the matchmaker's proposal with another man unless she considers the other man strictly better compared to the person with whom the matchmaker has paired, right? So that is the implication of this definition, right? Okay, so let's see how now the Gale-Shapley algorithm works when you have got basically indifferences, right? So this is an example where you have got three men, Mr. A, B, and C. Again, the men being in small letters, right? And you have got the woman, Miss A, Miss B, and Miss C. So capital A denotes Miss A, capital B denotes Miss B, and capital C denotes Miss C, right? These are the preference rankings, right? So notice that from the woman's perspective, these rankings are strict, right? So Miss A ranks Mr. C strictly over Mr. B over Mr. C, right? And you can see similarly. But from the men's perspectives, there are some ties, right? So Mr. A ranks Miss A as the best option, but after that, he is indifferent in the sense that he ranks Miss B and Miss C as equally likely, right? So after Miss A, right? So in terms of like the best option is to be paired with Miss A, but if Miss A it's not possible to do that, then Mr. A considers Miss B and Miss C as equally attractive, right? Similarly, from Mr. B's perspective, you have got that the first best option can be either Miss A or Miss B, so they are both equally attractive from his perspective, but after that he would rank Miss C, right? Okay, so what happens here? So again, we kind of like think about the running the Gale-Shapley algorithm. So the first stage is that the men are going to kind of like propose to their top choices, right? So from Mr. A's perspective, that means that he is going to propose to Miss A, right? From Mr. C's perspective, that means that also he's going to propose to Miss A, but from Mr. B's perspective, that means that he is indifferent between kind of like proposing to Miss A and Miss B, right? Because he ranks both of them as equally good, right? Okay, so here, this is how we can kind of like represent this. So Miss A is going to definitely get a proposal from Mr. A and Mr. C, but the proposal from Mr. B can go to both Miss A or Miss B, right? So what happens here, whenever you've got basically indifferences, what we have to do is that we will decide to basically, break the tie in an arbitrary way. What does that mean? It means that if you have ranked it 1 and 1, we are going to say that one of them we are going to give rank 1, the other is we are going to give rank 2, right? And you can break it in the other way around also. This would not have made any difference. You can check. You could have broken this as 1, 2. That is fine. So one other thing that you have to do is that here in the original preference ranking, it was both of them were 1, 1, and Miss C was sec 2 in that sense, right? But once you have broken it up into 1 and 2, clearly then the ranking will also drop down to 3, right? Why? Because clearly from Mr. B's perspective, we can see in the original ranking as well that Miss C is worse compared to Miss A and Miss B, right? So from that perspective, this will drop down. Similarly, we can see here that when we had this from Mr. A's perspective, we had that Miss A was the best, so she had rank 1, but Miss B and Miss C were equally attractive, so we had both of them as rank 2. Now, again, break it up arbitrarily. So for example, we can decide that you are going to break up such that, Miss C has rank 2 and Miss B is going to have rank 3, right? Okay. Now run the Gill-Shapley algorithm on this one, right? So we are still going to have that Miss A is going to get proposals from A and C, but from here, we are going to see that Miss B is going to get one proposal from Mr. B, right? So that's the first step. So now that Miss A has two proposals from A and C, we have to decide how to break that up. So we go to Miss A's preference. We can see that she prefers C over A. So she's going to reject A's proposal, right? So A's proposal is rejected. So now A has to kind of like go to the second option, right? And as per our kind of like breaking up the tie in this arbitrary way, he is going to propose to Miss C, right? And so therefore, we are going to end up with CBA. In this case, because you have got only one kind of like proposals, there's not going to be any breaking up here, right? And therefore, the stable matching system that's going to come is that Miss A is going to be paired with Mr. C, Miss B is going to be paired with Mr. B, and Miss C is going to be paired with Mr. A. And you can once again verify that under the original ranking, right? And in the way in which we have defined the stability notion, that this is once again example of actually stable matching, right? So this is again another demonstration where we may have made some restrictive assumptions to start out with, but we can see here that those are mostly for demonstration purposes. You can relax all these assumptions of allowing indifferences, of allowing people to have preferences to being single rather than to have to necessarily be with someone. Or you can restrict this, you can allow this restriction of like equal number of men and women to go away, but still the Gill-Shapley algorithm works, right? So it's very robust in that sense.